I want to talk to you about something difficult today, the 2006 Israeli-Lebanon War, because its unresolved threads continue to influence the region to this day. We'll see how the outcome of this war has changed how both sides might approach a future conflict. This is Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. When he came to power in 1999, Israel had already been occupying southern Lebanon for over a decade. He was Israel's highest decorated soldier, with 35 years experience, so he had some perspective on military strategy. The IDF controlled 10% of Lebanon in what they called a security zone. It was meant to protect northern Israel from a long history of attacks from various armed factions, and yet according to Barak, it was no longer having the desired effect. There were increasing Israeli casualties and frequent rocket attacks continued. There appeared to be no clear military victory in sight. On top of all this, there was growing international pressure mounting for Barak to comply with UN Security Council Resolution 425. This resolution called for Israel to withdraw to the internationally recognized border. Ehud Barak took a long, hard look at the guerrilla war that was being waged against him in southern Lebanon, and he assessed that the ongoing conflict with Hezbollah wasn't yielding any strategic benefit for Israel anymore. So in May 2000, Barak's government ordered the withdrawal of IDF forces, but this withdrawal had the effect of making Hezbollah's popularity soar among the public in Lebanon. This is the town of Bint Jabala in southern Lebanon. It'll become central to the story again later. It's where the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, held a victory speech directly after the withdrawal. To an audience of 100,000 people, he said, quote, "Israel owns nuclear weapons and has the strongest air force in the region, and it's weaker than a spider's web." Hezbollah viewed the Israeli military's withdrawal as a victory for themselves, and they took credit for it after years of fighting. It may stand to reason that, logically, since the IDF had withdrawn from southern Lebanon, the fighting would naturally stop. But the opposite happened. This is partly because there were still several pieces of land, like the tishabav farms, that were still in Israeli control, but Lebanon disputed rightfully belonged to them. Hezbollah pointed to this as justification to continue their armed resistance. They experienced a swelling of their ranks and increased funding from Iran. After the IDF's departure, Hezbollah was not really one to turn down any opportunity being handed to them. They exploited this strategic move fully by setting up shop throughout southern Lebanon. They instantly got to work on constructing a vast network of weapons depots, bunkers, and bases using millions of dollars in donations from Iran and Syria. In 2001, Prime Minister Ehud Barak would lose his re-election bid to Mert. This was partly because many viewed his unilateral withdrawal from Lebanon as a sign of weakness that emboldened Hezbollah. By 2006, right before the war began, estimates of their force strength at the time varied widely, but most cite between 3,000 and 5,000 fighters. The immediate events that led up to the war began on the morning of July 12, 2006, when Hezbollah launched several volleys of rockets into northern Israel. This put their troops on full alert to respond to that attack, but it was actually a diversion designed to trick the IDF. At the same time, a group of fighters penetrated in a border raid. In the ensuing firefight, 8 Israeli soldiers were KIA, while 2 others, Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Regev, were kidnapped. Hassan Nasrallah had several motivations for Hezbollah's attack. First, he hoped to use the captured Israeli soldiers to bargain for an exchange of prisoners. Second, he aimed to show the world that the IDF was not an invincible war machine which would win his organization political capital and legitimacy inside Lebanon. Mert announced Israel's objectives for the war. First, they sought the return of the abducted Israeli soldiers. Second, they wanted the Lebanese army to disarm and remove Hezbollah. According to the IDF Major General David Ivory, their goals were to also restore Israel's deterrence and distance Hezbollah from the border. Now officially, Israel never declared war on Lebanon itself, but stated they were only attacking Hezbollah. Keep in mind, the IDF had previously been able to advance all the way to the capital Beirut in 1982. They successfully destroyed the PLO armed resistance along the way. Mert had no reason to believe this time would be any different. This is where you need to meet the former commander of the IDF, Halutz, who would be in charge of the 2006 war. He began his military career as a fighter pilot in 1969 and quickly rose through the ranks due to his exceptional skills and leadership abilities. He shot down 3 enemy aircraft in dogfights during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. However, by the time he made it to the top of command as Chief of Staff in 2005, Halutz had become enamored with a strange new theory of war. He observed how the United States appeared to quickly win wars in Iraq and Kosovo with mainly just a bombing campaign. He fell in love with a new age war strategy called Systemic Operational Design, or SOD. It relied heavily on air power only, but it was more than that. It was an odd combination of Soviet operational art, French postmodern philosophy, social sciences, psychology, urban planning, and even ancient Chinese military thinking. SOD had all of the pretentiousness of military officer planning and none of the practical battlefield benefits that you'd want in return. Here, let me explain. Systemic operational design doctrine has been described as, quote, "It's an application of systems theory to operational art. It's an attempt to rationalize complexity through systemic logic. SOD is a holistic approach that translates strategic direction and policy into operational level designs." What the hell does that even mean? It sounded like a second lieutenant who never fired a shot in anger came up with that. To boil it all down, the new doctrine proposed that a war could be won thanks almost entirely to artillery, air power, technology, and intelligence, with very limited ground maneuvers. Halutz was a career Air Force guy. He wanted to bomb Hezbollah into submission, and that's exactly how he attempted to prosecute the war in its early days. He decided to not use their pre-existing contingency plan called May Ramam. The original plan called for an immediate massive call-up of reserve forces and then a division-sized ground assault. Reports indicate Commander Halutz convinced the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense of his standalone air campaign strategy, even though there was skepticism of the plan. Within hours, the Israeli Air Force, the IAF, and a small Special Forces ground raid began hitting Hezbollah targets across the border. But Hezbollah had already planned for this exact response and dispersed their rocket teams across the open countryside. This move avoided taking heavy losses. Israel would fly 15,000 air sorties and hit 7,000 targets throughout the war, but the missions did little to stop the pace of incoming rocket attacks. Hezbollah had created decoy command posts and fake launch sites, while their real ones were hidden or dug deep 40 meters into the rocky, hilly terrain. There are conflicting reports of how effective the initial bombing campaign actually was. IDF Command, they estimate that Hezbollah had 16,000 rockets prior to the war, of which they claim to have destroyed 90% within the first 2 days of aerial bombing. But incoming rocket fire to northern Israel remained at a steady rate of about 100 per day. On July 13th, the Israeli leadership ordered their navy to blockade Lebanese ports. They escalated when the IAF bombed the runways at Beirut International Airport. They essentially cut off Lebanon from the rest of the world. This coercion strategy, as Commander Halutz described it, was to serve as an alternative to a ground offensive. He said, quote, "If the soldiers are not returned, we will turn Lebanon's clock back 20 years. The Israeli Air Force then targeted the Beirut-Damascus highway to prevent Syria and Iran from transferring more weapons to assist in the war effort. Take a look at this map. It shows the concentration of Israeli airstrikes all throughout mainly southern Lebanon, but including other parts of the country as well. 2 weeks into the war, it started to become clear. Commander Halutz's strategy of air effects wasn't producing the desired results.
Evidence for this comes from the fact that Israeli President Olmert
announced Operation Change of Direction, which would be an actual ground assault. As the Winograd Commission finding would later reveal, by the time Olmert made the decision, only 5 regular brigades of about 10,000 soldiers were available, half of which would need to be tied up acting as police forces on the border of Gaza and the West Bank for the duration of the war.
The conventional army loses if it does not win. The guerrilla wins if he does not lose.
Widespread proliferation of anti-tank guided missiles since the last invasion in 1982 meant that the Israeli armored advantage was more negated this time around. One of the first major battles of the war occurred in the village of Marun al-Raz. Marun al-Raz is about a mile from the border. It was a Hezbollah-held staging village. From the detailed publication, We Were Caught Unprepared by Matt Matthews for the U.S. Army Combined Arms Center, in keeping with the new doctrine of systemic not going to stop the rockets, yet soldiers would get killed. It's risk without reward. The increased casualties convinced the Israeli military leadership that a wider call-up was required, and in response they activated more than 300,000 reservists. While that sounds like a lot, we'll see only 15,000 ground forces were ever actually committed inside Lebanon. These reserve forces faced serious supply issues from a logistics line that had collapsed. There wasn't enough ammunition, body armor, or even food and water. Soldiers were forced to scavenge occupied towns for basic supplies or accept handouts from civilian population. This was because supply trucks were not allowed to go forward due to fear of anti-tank missiles. Troops would be asked to press deep into terrain that in some ways is even more dangerous than an urban battle in Gaza. This declassified CIA document explains the tactical challenges of Lebanon's geography. It's mainly composed of hills that are around 100 meters high and thick vegetation giving excellent elevated and concealed positions. It's intersected by 3 rivers, the most strategic of which comes up in all of their operational planning. It's a theme that we see throughout. The Litani River. See how it cuts straight across southern Lebanon? The river is the goal. The river is where all IDF contingency plans aim to push Hezbollah to the north of. Since there are only 4 official border crossings, this creates natural kill zones for an armored assault. Deep irrigation ditches on the side of the roads prevent vehicles from taking cover. There are over 400 towns in southern Lebanon, where over 500,000 of the 5.5 million population reside. And so when thousands of IDF troops started their full ground offensive, the next several battles of the war were some of the costliest. And one of the most notorious of these battles took place in none other than Bint Jabal, a city of some 20,000 inhabitants. The location had symbolic meaning because it's where the Hezbollah leader had given his victory speech earlier. That's reportedly why Commander Halutz wanted to capture it and create what his team called a spectacle of victory. All these terms, consciousness of victory, cognitive perception of defeat, and spectacle of victory, were all from that new SOD doctrine that proposed that they could demoralize Hezbollah into giving up. Halutz ordered the leader of the northern ground forces, Uday Adam, to capture the town with 1 battalion of 1,000 men. Adam reminded him that that wasn't nearly enough considering there were 5,000 houses in the city, according to him. But the order still stood. On July 24th, 2 companies of about 200 Israeli soldiers made the initial assault headlong into the city. They were ambushed and quickly repelled in a chaotic firefight. One Israeli veteran of the battle described it as, quote, an ambush from hell. Hezbollah fighters took advantage of positions in high-rise buildings, forcing the Israelis to fight from disadvantaged positions. The IDF withdrew from Bint Jabal on July 30th after sustaining casualties in what Nasrallah called a serious defeat. The IDF would attempt to capture the town on 2 other occasions. Commander Halutz continued to send in limited battalion-sized raids. According to the Winograd report, what was described as a division-sized battle was in reality no more than a series of limited engagements between IDF forces and Hezbollah fighters on the eastern edge, and to some extent on the western edge of the town. However, they found that the failure to capture Bint Jabal became a symbol of the unsuccessful action of the Israeli Defense Forces throughout the fighting. Investigations found that soldiers under fire were unable to call for air support for fear of friendly fire. They received contradictory and confusing orders that were formatted in the new SOD doctrine instead of using standard time details. This resulted in some confusion amongst the units, which were accidentally never sent into Lebanon at all. But the final battle of the war has received some of the most scrutiny for its implications of the future of armored warfare. The Battle of Wadi Saluki was one of the final efforts to push Hezbollah back to the Saluki River. An air assault element of infantry pushed in advance on August 12th. They confirmed it looked clear. The Merkava tank column of 24 tanks made its way in. Tanks had to traverse a 400-meter-long narrow path completely exposed. A mine exploded behind them, and then all hell broke loose, with Kornet laser-guided anti-tank missiles. A veteran of the battle said in an interview, quote, "When the first tank was hit, we knew that the nightmare had begun. You should understand that the first missile which hits is not really the dangerous missile. The ones which come afterwards are the dangerous ones. By the end of the battle, 11 of the tanks were significantly destroyed or damaged. Udi Adam, commander of the Northern Ground Forces, was eventually replaced following some of these results. Despite the losses, the IDF did conquer that town and moved up to the river, but by that time, the war had officially ended. The war came to an end the next day on August 14th, after the United Nations Security Council unanimously approved Security Council Resolution 1701, which called for a ceasefire and end to the hostilities, the withdrawal of all Israeli forces from Lebanon, and the complete disarmament of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Both sides agreed to the terms, although Hezbollah was never actually disarmed. Quantifying the cost of war is always a difficult thing to do. You can't throw up numbers of the price paid by both sides in lives and property to determine a winner. You can't look at cold, hard, sterile numbers and say which side was the victor. The reason to examine it, though, is because it's important to look at the costs of war. It's important to give some sense of the destruction that war brings to everyone. Approximately 1 million Lebanese fled their homes and 300,000 Israelis were displaced during the war. 125,000 homes and apartment buildings were destroyed or damaged in Lebanon, and several thousand Israeli homes were damaged. The amount of casualties by Hezbollah has been debated widely, ranging from 180 to 1,300. Israel lost 120 soldiers. With the benefit of nearly 2 decades, it's easier to see the results of the war now in hindsight. Hezbollah had an estimated 16,000 rockets and 15,000 soldiers before the war began. Today they have an estimated 100,000 stockpile of rockets and missiles, and between 50 to 100,000 estimated soldiers. Nasrallah claimed it as a victory. There's also evidence to suggest the criticism of Commander Halutz may have been overblown. Supporters claim that the IDF achieved its main objective in the end. For the next 2 years after the war, Hezbollah didn't fire any rockets into Israel, and for many years after that, the sector was quiet. Supporters of the war point to this as the IDF achieving deterrence and exacting enough of a cost on Hezbollah for them to think twice about attacking again.
Supporters of Israel's prosecution of the war also claim the United States intervened early in the war to curb the strength of Israel's response.
The war provided insights into Hezbollah's most advanced capabilities. It revealed weaknesses in the IDF's reserve and air power coordination that could be fixed for the next conflict. But not everyone saw it that way. Directly after the war, IDF reservists protested and demanded the top leaders of the government and military resign. This led to the Winograd Commission, a self-critical probe into the war that this episode is based on. A major finding from that investigation was that the new SOD doctrine was a major point of failure. IDF Chief of Staff Halutz said in the commission in retrospect that he would have called up reservists earlier in the conflict. He would go on to resign the next year in 2007, following criticisms of his command. The legacy of the war is that it was widely believed to have been a strategic defeat for the IDF, according to the Israeli military and government leadership themselves. The war elevated Hezbollah's standing inside Lebanon, and they've since gone on to become one of the most powerful entities inside the country. The equation since then has drastically changed. Now Iran is openly warning Israel that they would directly intervene this time around if Israel were to launch an offensive into Lebanon. The legacy of the 2006 war extends all the way to today, where both sides have become stronger and more determined. Both sides have learned valuable lessons that can only guarantee that a future war here would be many times more destructive.
If you found the video valuable in some way, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button, and check out one of these 2 videos here that I handpicked out for if you want to learn more information about this region. There's an invitation link in the description to our Discord channel if you want to join a community of over 5,500 other members who are interested in open source military intelligence and researching different conflicts around the world. There's a great community there if you'd like to join us, and I'm often in there chatting too.